right, Hope City. How is everybody this morning? You guys doing good? We're moving a little slow, aren't we? We got more coffee. We'll just have them bring it in here and do an IV in you this morning, all right? We'll get going. But, hey, I'm Adam. I'm our lead pastor here. And if you're new around here, we haven't had a chance to meet yet. I'd love to get to know you. I'll be out in the lobby after we get done here today. So please stop by and say hey. We'd love to get to know you. And right out of the gate this morning, as we're kicking off this new series, I just want to remind all of us what kind of church and community you walked into this morning. Whether you've been around Hope City for a couple of years now, or this is your very first time here, what you need to know about this community is we're a couple years old as a church, and we started this church with people like you and me in mind. We say it this way around Hope City, that no matter where you've been in life, no matter what you've done or what's been done to you, no matter what you believe about yourself or Jesus walking in here this morning, man, we are all in the same boat, meaning this, that we can bring all of our life, all of our struggles, all the stuff that we carry in here, and we get to lay it in front of Jesus and go, hey, Jesus, what do you want to do about this? We believe that we're all on this journey of experiencing Jesus and what he wants for our lives. And our hope as a church is that as we experience him, he doesn't just leave us where he found us, right? I don't want all the garbage in my life to continue to define my life. I want Jesus to change me in a way that makes an impact that lasts generations. So what you need to know about this church is that none of us has it all together, all right? None of us has it all figured out. No matter where you are on your spiritual journey, we just want to say, man, we are glad that you're here today. And our hope is that we can all experience the better way of life that Jesus has for us in community together. And that's at the heart of this new series that we're kicking off today called Church for the Unchurched. And that's like our vision statement as a church. So what we want to do over these next 6 weeks together is we want to take a deep dive on what kind of church is Hope City. What kind of community are we? And maybe more importantly than that, what kind of church does Jesus want us to be? What did he envision for this community called the church when he came up with this idea of the church? And how can we become the same kinds of people who are known for the same kinds of things that Jesus was known for and what he really cared about? And then beyond that, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the next 8 to 12 months as a church. And I want to kind of give us a vision for the future of where God is leading us as a community over this next year or so. And so we're going to set the stage today with this question right here. What did Jesus have in mind for his church? And what is our purpose in seeing it lived out? Now, to help set this up today, I want to play a little game. You guys up for a little game this morning? I'm going to throw up some logos on the screen of companies that you will know, all right? And I want you to tell me the one thing, the one word or phrase that each of these companies is known for, all right? And we're going to have some fun, so just yell it out when you see it. Let's go with the first one here. Apple. Technology, phones, let's just be honest, the best phones, all right? Now, buckle up. We're coming at you this morning, all right? Next. Oh, here we go. All right, Android. Just okay phones, right? Or that little green bubble that pops up in your iPhone users group chat. Hey, Android people, we love you, and we are so glad you're here. We are praying for you that you will convert and come to the light, all right? But this church is for anyone who wants to walk in here, like I just said, all right? Even Android users. All right, next one. Nike. What are they known for? Just do it. Shoes, yeah, right? How about this? The glorious golden arches of McDonald's. Cheeseburgers, hamburgers, heart attacks. Let's just be honest, all right? And then one more. Hope City. Yeah, love. I'm hearing a few different things. This one's a little bit harder, isn't it? Family, yeah. If we went around the room, we may all have slightly different answers on this one though, right? Some of us would go, hey, church is where we go on Sundays. It's the place that we go to. Others of us, we may look at Hope City and we go, man, I'm actually growing in my faith through this community. Or this is a community where I actually belong. How about fun? Did anybody grow up in a church where fun and church were incompatible? We like to have a lot of fun around here. And like somebody just yelled family. A lot of us have found family here in this community together. But if you were to talk to somebody who is not following Jesus yet or doesn't go to church, what would they say about who we are? And I'm just talking the church in general. I get this question all the time. People are like, hey, when I walk in the doors, will the roof cave in on me? Or will I catch on fire, spontaneously combust when I come in? Other people, if you talk to them about the church, they may go, man, it's a bunch of hypocrites. They don't have their crap together. They don't practice what they preach. They're judgmental. They're intolerant. And I can't be myself there. Others of us, we may talk to friends and they go, man, they're just out of touch with reality of what goes on in my day-to-day life or our world. Increasingly, people would go, Christians, man, they can be some of the most hateful people on the planet. They don't love people well, and what they teach doesn't apply to my life. Or it seems like some sort of old-fashioned club where they don't practice what they preach. But how about this? That's the church in general. If you were to talk to your friends about Hope City, What would you say to them about who we are? Because my guess is we all have friends, right? That, man, we would do anything to see them walk through the doors of this community and experience Jesus working in their lives the same way that he's working in our lives. And maybe you say things like this, like, man, we are not like those churches. We're not like the church you grew up in. You just got to come and see it. Or we throw great parties. We love to party around here. Or there's this crazy pastor that has all these tattoos, and he's kind of handsome. He talks way too fast. Only my wife thinks it's a handsome thing, but we just go with it, all right? Yeah, hey, come on, let's go. Or maybe you'd say this, it's a newer church, it's a little bit smaller, and it's more community-driven than those other big churches. Maybe you've described it that way. And all of those things are fine, but none of them really sum up who we are as a church. To understand who we are as a church and what we're all about, we have to understand who Jesus is and what he's all about. Because anything or anyone less than Jesus means missing the mark for ourselves individually and who we are as a community. So to unpack this a little bit more, we have to focus in on Jesus. And I want to start by giving us a quick history lesson here, okay? So hang with me for a minute. If you loved history and you just nerd out on history, you're going to wish I covered this a little bit more. But if history class put you to sleep in school, anyone, you're going to be able to follow me in this. It's going to be simple enough, all right? So this idea of the church, or this movement of Christianity, can be historically traced to a group of followers of Jesus, a small group of people in the first century that began in this small and at the time non-influential nation of Israel. And this movement called Christianity, it actually wasn't called Christianity when they first started. It was called the Way. It was made up of a group of people who dedicated their lives to living out the way and the teachings of Jesus and holding on to the claim that Jesus came into this world claiming to be God himself, that he lived a perfect, sinless life, and he died the death that we all deserve on the cross, but Jesus didn't stay dead. These people were willing to stake their lives on the claim that Jesus came back to life, and this is what they believed to be true. They believed that we were promised eternity in heaven one day when we do follow Jesus. That's certainly true, but more than that, what they believe is that Jesus has the power to start changing our lives right here, right now, today, so that we can become people who start living out Jesus' way in our time and place right here in 2024. And that's where this movement called the church was born. The church in Jesus' mind was never an organization or a time and place on Sunday mornings. No, the church is a group of people who follow Jesus, and through us, he's changing our lives, and we are making an impact that's lasted generation after generation. That's why we sit here today in Northwest Arkansas. Think about this. Halfway around the world from where this movement started, we're learning the same truths and letting Jesus work in our lives in the same way that this small group of people in Israel did over 2,000 years ago. That's pretty cool, isn't it? See, Jesus' invitation and his intention for his mission, it's always been for us to follow him and for his word to spread through the people who follow him. And that's how we know that this is how Jesus, or here's why we know that this is how Jesus wanted it to happen this way. Because if Jesus did not want it to happen this way, for his word and movement to spread through people, Jesus would have stuck around, right? Like he would have just stayed around here. He would have preached all around the world. He would have lived forever and told everyone everything. And he could have done it all himself, right? But he didn't. See, Jesus' strategy to reach the world, it's you and it's me. Jesus' strategy to reach the world is through everyday people living everyday lives in our time and place in the world. And it's through people that don't always have it all together, who don't always get it all right, but in community together, Jesus is changing us, and we're learning to live out his way in our time and place. And here's what we need to know. We talked about this last week. Rarely does it happen all at once. Why? Because growth takes time. And rarely does it mean hopping on a plane and becoming a missionary in some remote part of the world, like halfway around the globe. No, generally, it starts right outside of our own doorsteps. So let's dive into this, okay? What did Jesus have in mind for his church? And what's the purpose we play in seeing that lived out? So today we're going to be in Matthew chapter 4, all right? And you can turn in your phones or Bibles. It's going to be up here on the screens. But Matthew was written by a guy named Matthew who had a really jacked up life before he started following Jesus. And once Matthew started following Jesus, Jesus started changing Matthew's life. And Matthew started recording all of these stories, all these eyewitness accounts of what he saw and experienced with his friend Jesus. And so when we read the words of Matthew, we are reading from an eyewitness perspective of what it was like to be with Jesus. And what Matthew writes down in Matthew 4 is Jesus calling his first followers, his first disciples, to come be with him. And then we're going to see that through this, Jesus is going to start changing their lives, and he's going to invite them into a way of life that has now become Christianity and what we call the church. And as we read through this, I want to keep this question in front of us. What did Jesus have in mind for his church? And what is our purpose in seeing it lived out today? All right, Matthew 4, starting in verse 18. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew, and they were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Hang on to that. That's really important, okay? Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. And at once they left their nets and they followed Jesus. And then going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James the son of Zebedee and his brother John. And they were in a boat with their father Zebedee. You hit that next slide, Josh. They were in the boat with their father Zebedee preparing their nets. And Jesus called them. And immediately they left their boat and their father, and they followed Jesus. Now, if you're like me, and you've read this story before, it's always seems strange to me, okay? I'm just going to be honest with you. And if you've read it a whole bunch, it's easy to miss how bizarre this really is. You've got these four friends, two sets of brothers that are fishing buddies. And they're fishermen on the Sea of Galilee in northern Israel. And like fishing is their way of life. It's their livelihood. Okay? It's their income source. It's everything that they poured their lives into as they've learned fishing from their father and as their father learned fishing from his father before him. So I want to invite you to imagine this for a moment, okay? I want you to put yourself in their shoes today. All right? Let's be honest. Put yourself in their sandals, okay? Because they didn't have Nikes back then. You are a first century Hebrew. You're likely in your late teens or early 20s. And you run a fishing business in northern Israel on the Sea of Galilee. And this way of life has pretty much been mapped out for you. Like you're a fisherman, and your father before you was a fisherman, and his father before him was a fisherman, and you just catch fish. You live under Roman occupation, all right? And so there's not a lot of options for you. You just keep your head down, you live a quiet life, you provide for your family, and you certainly pay your taxes to Rome. And then one day you notice a man coming towards you, all right? You notice a man coming towards you, and you recognize him as a man that everyone has been talking about. It's Jesus, and he's like this rabbi. And what that meant in Israel at the time was he's a teacher, and he's been saying and doing things that no one else has ever said or done. And he comes directly up to you. He looks you in the eye, and he asks you to leave behind your net, your boats, your family, everything, and follow him. What in the world could possibly compel you to leave behind your whole way of life, your job, your income, your family, and go with him? And what's so bizarre and stunning about this story is that these four fishing buddies, they actually do it. And here's the thing for us here today, like those cheesy Christian movies or those storybook Bibles that we all grew up on, they don't help us out much here, do they? Because they picture Jesus like walking down the beach in his bathrobe, right? He's got this beauty pageant sash on, and his hair's like all blowing in the wind. Like honestly, he looks like a Swedish supermodel in these images, right? And the disciples, like robots, they just kind of like, and they just start following him. Anybody grow up on that version of this story before? But what's really interesting is that in its original context, what Peter, Andrew, James, and John do in following Jesus and leaving their old lives behind, it actually makes perfect sense. The problem is we just don't understand their context in our Western American culture. So another quick history lesson here. You guys with me so far? Is this making sense? With me? Okay, cool. So we're going to learn about the Jewish educational system this morning. I know that's what you were hoping to hear about when you came into church today. You're like, Adam, please teach us about the Jewish educational system. But here we go. The Jewish people believed that God had handed down his word to Moses, one of their great historical leaders. And that God had given Moses the first 5 books of the Bible that they called the Torah. And the Torah was like known as teaching or instruction or the way. And so it was the way of life that God had handed down through Moses so the people could know who they were created to become. And so in Jewish culture, there were different levels of school, just like we have like elementary school, middle and junior high school, and college. They had different levels of school when they were growing up in Israel. The first one was called Bet Sefer. And this one would have been like elementary school. And this started around age 5, and it went until kids were around 9 or 10 years old. And during this time, kids would certainly receive a basic education, but the main focus of their study was the Torah, the first 5 books of your Old Testament. And by the time that kids were around 9 or 10 years old, they would have the entire Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those 5 books, they would have those books memorized, word for word. They could quote it inside and out. Now, just for context, my kids are 5, 8, and 9. And I am lucky if they can summarize a Bible story for me, let alone even quote like a verse of scripture, okay? Just being honest with you right now. These kids would have it all memorized. And then at the end of Beth's affair, most kids would be sent home to learn the family trade, to apprentice under their parents, to do what their parents had done, and learn how to manage a household. And that made up about 90% of the kids in Israel at the time. But then the best of the best in Israel, around 10 or 11 years old, they would be invited into the next level of school. And only 10% of kids made the cut to enter into Bet Midrash. Bet Midrash. And again, this is only like the best of the best, top 10%. And in Bet Midrash, they would memorize the entire Old Testament. Like Genesis through Malachi, word for word, memorized, all right? And again, I don't know about you, but I don't have an entire book of the Bible down to memory at all. Like not even close, all right? These kids would memorize every single word of this. And then of those kids, the best of the best of the best would move on to the next level. And this was known as Bet Talmud. Bet Talmud. And what would happen with Bet Talmud is they would apply to become an apprentice of a rabbi. They would go to a rabbi, and this rabbi would just grill them. He would ask them questions about the law and the teachings that they had gotten along the way. He would ask them questions about the interpretations of the law. And if their interpretation of the law lined up with the rabbi's interpretation of the law, then they would be invited to follow or become a disciple or a student of that rabbi. But again, only the best of the best of the best made the cut. This would be like the equivalent of an Ivy League education. And if these kids were invited into Bet Talmud, they were actually invited by a rabbi to come. They would leave everything behind. They'd leave their family, their work, their school, their home, everything. They would go follow this rabbi. And there was a saying in ancient Israel. You got to imagine this. It's hot and dusty, and they walked everywhere, right? There's not public transportation. And so they would desire to follow their rabbi, and they would want to follow him so closely that they would become covered in the dust of their rabbi. That was their saying. That they would get whatever their rabbi just stepped in, caked all over the front of them. I mean, can you imagine this? And so this picture in Israel would have been common. Rabbis going around teaching, and kids following their rabbi and being covered in his dust. This is what every Jewish kid would have desired to become. To be a student of a rabbi, to be a disciple, and be covered in his dust. It would have been like being drafted into the NBA or landing your dream job, all right? Now, you may be wondering, Adam, what in the world does this have to do with us here today? Like, why are we talking about the Jewish educational system? What does this have to do with Matthew chapter 4? Well, it has everything to do with Matthew 4, all right? We're going to go back and look at these verses again. And Josh, you're looking at me. I'm way off. My notes crashed, so I don't have them. Could I actually get that physical copy from you real quick? Yeah. That way I don't get way off track? Yeah. So, in Matthew chapter 4, verses 18 through 20, Jesus comes to the Sea of Galilee, and he sees two brothers, Simon and Peter. Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew, and they were casting a net into the lake, for they were doing what? They were fishing. Okay, hang on to that. Come follow me, Jesus says, and I will send you out to fish for people. And at once they left their nets and they followed Jesus. Then Jesus goes on and he finds two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John, and they were in a boat with their father, Zebedee, doing what? Apprenticing to be fishermen, preparing the nets. And Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father, and they followed Jesus. All right? So let's draw a couple applications for us here in 2024 for our lives today, and let's look at what this means for us as a church around here at Hope City for the next 8 months or a year or so. All right, the first thing is this. Jesus invites anyone who has the desire or wants to follow him to be his disciple. Remember how we said earlier that only the best of the best were invited to apprentice under a rabbi? Only like the top 10% of the top 10%. What did the rest go home and do? They learned the family trade. These guys were fishing. They weren't the best of the best. They didn't make the cut. And no other rabbi has asked them to be his disciple. They're the ones who were sent home to learn to fish, to have babies, and to pray that a rabbi would ask them to follow him. They're the not enoughs. They're learning the family business and being a disciple of Jesus. What we have to hang on to, it's for anyone who wants it, for anyone who chooses to follow him. Let's look at the track record of who Jesus chose to follow him. There's these 4 blue-collar fishermen, right? Then there's this tax collector named Matthew, whose life was a mess until Jesus said, hey, come follow me, and his life started to change. Matthew made a living by working for Rome. On the other hand, there's a political radical that Jesus calls that wanted to overthrow Rome by force. There were women who followed Jesus. And at that time, no rabbi would ever invite a woman to come follow him. There were former sex addicts and prostitutes. There were formerly demon-possessed people who were too broken and too far gone. And yet Jesus says, come follow me. See, this way of life is for anyone who wants or has the desire to be Jesus' disciple and follow him. It doesn't matter who you are or what you've done or where you've been in life. Jesus' invitation is the same to every person who has this desire to become his disciple, to become his student, to have a relationship with him. And the whole goal of being a disciple is this. It's anyone who is increasingly learning to align our lives intentionally and live in such a way that is pursuing Jesus and then inviting others to do the same. A disciple would have said it this way, that I want to be with my rabbi. Wherever he goes, I just want to be with him. My goal is to become like him. And then ultimately the goal of a disciple is to learn to do as he did. To learn to do as he did. See, being a follower of Jesus means that we are invited into a way of life, that Jesus is changing us, that we are becoming more and more like him, and that we are making an impact that lasts generations. Now, you may be going, hey, Adam, are you telling me that what I'm signing up for is to leave my job, leave my family, leave everything, and go follow some dude around Israel? No, what it means to be a disciple of Jesus is to let Jesus inform how you live your life as if it were his. Like if Jesus was married to your spouse, if Jesus had your kids, if he worked your job, if Jesus walked through this life and he was single as you're single, if Jesus had your sexual orientation, if Jesus had your life, how would he live your human life as if it were his? And this invitation is open to anyone who wants it. Now, the second thing that we have to hang on to here is that if we choose to follow Jesus, it's going to cost us something. It's going to cost us something, all right? What it cost Peter, Andrew, James, and John was leaving behind everything, their livelihood, their income, everything that they had held on to in this life up to this point to go follow Jesus. And if we're going to follow Jesus here today, it's going to cost us something, all right? Sometimes we get this mixed up when we start following Jesus and we think, man, he's asking for everything from day one. But here's the deal. These guys had known Jesus for 18 months before he made this invitation to them. All he's asking you to do is to look at your life where you are, starting right here, right now, today, and to take one step towards him. Think about following Jesus around Israel. How do you become covered in the dust of your rabbi? One step at a time, right? But we have to be honest that as we take steps with Jesus, it's going to cost us something. It's going to cost us time, right? The harsh reality of our lives is that rarely in 2024 do we have the time or the space in our lives to follow Jesus the way that he's inviting us to. This is a really difficult truth to hang on to. But so many of us, I think, miss out on the full, abundant life that Jesus is inviting us into simply because we try to add Jesus into our lives as an add-on. We try to wedge him into our schedules. We try to make him something just additional that we do to feel good, to make sure we've got this get-out-of-hell-free card, like this insurance policy. But very few of us experience the life he has for us because very few of us actually make the space and time to really devote our lives to following him. The second thing that's going to cost us is it's going to cost us trust. As we follow Jesus, he actually wants to change our lives. I've heard it said that every sin in our life could be traced back to a good desire that we've held on to something else to fulfill other than Jesus. Every sin is based in a good desire, but we don't actually believe that Jesus says, I can fulfill that desire for you better than you could ever come up with on your own. And what that's going to cost us is trust. It's going to cost us trusting Jesus that he actually has a better way of life for us. See, a life of following Jesus isn't about addition. It's about subtraction. It isn't about wedging Jesus into our lives and fitting him in where it best makes sense to us. No, it's about going, Jesus, here is all of my life. Here's all of my time. Here are all of my desires. And now what do you want to do with them? Here's why Jesus calls you, though. He calls anyone who wants to. But it's going to cost us something. But ultimately, the reason that Jesus comes to us is because he believes in us. Did you know that? Jesus believes in you. And this is one of the hardest things for us to get our head around, right? Because many times in church, we're told we have to believe in Jesus. And I don't know about you, but I look at my own faith, and sometimes my own faith can feel so weak and fragile. Anybody else? But ultimately, the reason that Jesus chooses you is because he believes in you. Remember what Peter, Andrew, James, and John were doing before Jesus came in their direction? They were fishing. They were told that they weren't good enough to apply to follow a rabbi and beg to become his disciple. But in this story, we don't see them seeking out Jesus. We see Jesus coming to them. Like Jesus believed in them long before they ever believed in Jesus. In the Gospels, Jesus reminds us of this. He goes, you didn't choose me. I chose you. So why is that? Why would Jesus choose us? Well, unless a rabbi actually believed that you had the capacity within you to be with him. He wants you to be with him. Unless he believed you had the capacity to learn to become like him. Unless he believed that you could go on and do as he did, he would never choose you. But Jesus has chosen you. And Jesus has invited you into a way of life that starts to look more and more like his. Again, this is going to be a really hard concept to get our heads around, right? And it can be a really hard thing to understand in our day and time. But Jesus has chosen you, and he said, now you're my plan to reach the world. If you want to know what your purpose on the planet is, it's to follow Jesus, to be with him, to become like him, and then learn to do as he did. He believes in you right where you sit today, and he wants to invite you into a kingdom life that fulfills your deepest desires and that lives out your purpose on this planet. And Jesus must believe in us, right? Because why else would he entrust the most important movement that this world has ever known to a bunch of not good enoughs? Why would he invite people like you and me and say, now you're my plan to reach the world? Hey, you know what one of the last things Jesus said to his followers of the day and what he invites us to do today? He goes, your mission is to make disciples, to be a follower of me and make other followers of me so that everyone everywhere gets to know the depth of love that I have for them. So I just want you to imagine with me, what if this was actually possible? What if we could actually become the kinds of people that God has created us to be? What if we could be formed in his image, designed to live in relationship, to be with Jesus, to become like him, and then to go on and learn to do as he did? What if we could become the kinds of people who don't just discover our own purpose in Jesus, but what if we became the kinds of people who let everyone around us know how loved they are by him? Who let everybody know how good his grace is and the healing that's possible for their lives? What if we could invite everyone that we bump into this way of life of following Jesus? Jesus believes that you can. It's why he chose you. Here's the question that we have to wrestle with. Do you believe it? Do you believe that it's actually true? And if you don't, what's getting in the way of that? Well, in John chapter 10, verse 10, Jesus said it this way. He said, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. When you look at your life and what you've placed your hope in and what you've prioritized in life, is this how you would describe your life? As a full, abundant life? Or do you get to the end of the day and lay your head on the pillow and would you describe your life this way? Like lacking, drained, tired, burned out. And when you consider where you are right now and all the things you have in front of you, like your marriage, your parents, and your politics, when you consider your finances, your time, is it actually possible that Jesus knows better than you do? He knows better than I do on the type of life that's actually possible for us. And if that's you, here's Jesus' invitation to every single one of us. We looked at this last week, but in Matthew chapter 11, starting in verse 28, Jesus invited us to this. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. That word yoke is a rabbi's teaching. That word yoke is a rabbi's way of life. What Jesus is saying is for everyone who's tired and weary and burned out and feeling like that you're not good enough, come to me. Take on my life. Take on my teachings. Take on my way. Be my disciple, and I will give you rest. Learn to be with me. Become like me. And learn to do as I did. Now, when you look at these verses, does what Jesus described here look anything like the life that you actually want for yourself? Does that sound like a better way to do life? So how do we do it? What's it look like to put this into practice? Well, I want to close out by looking at two things before we get out of here. One is where we're headed over the next year as a church and how as a community we're going to put this into practice. And then I want to look at how we apply this to our lives individually here today in 2024, all right? So I've come up with this like Venn diagram. This may not make sense to anyone outside of my brain, okay? But this is a peek inside my brain of what's going on. I'm going to break it down, and then we're going to cover it in more detail over these next 6 weeks together, all right? So at the core, at the center of this diagram, we're a church for the unchurched. What does that mean? Well, it means that we will continually fight to prioritize those who Jesus fought and prioritized in his life. Those who didn't make the cut, the down and outs, the not good enoughs, those who maybe have experienced church but have never experienced Jesus, and those who have never set foot in a church before. We're a community that believes that everyone everywhere can come to experience Jesus and he can change their lives and then make an impact through us that will last generations. So if you want to know what it means to be a church for the unchurched, here we go. All right? We are far from perfect. We've got more questions than answers. But we love to help lost and broken people in this world get to experience all that Jesus has. And so here's what this means for us on a practical level here today, all right? We want to be a church that doesn't try to protect our Christian club. We want to be a church that prioritizes the outsiders that Jesus prioritized and called. And so if you come in here and you smell like you drank a 12-pack last night, we're glad you're here, all right? If you show up thinking the roof is going to fall in on you when you walk through these doors, it's not, and we're glad you're here. If you show up in a relationship that's outside God's design for your life, we're glad you're here. If you show up in here and you're wearing a three-piece suit or a cut-off t-shirt, we're just glad you wore something, okay? And we're glad you're here. If you got an ankle monitor on or you're 10 years sober, we are glad you're here. If you got no tattoos or you've got face tattoos, we are glad you're here. We believe around here at Hope City that you can bring all of your baggage, all of your pain, all of your hurt, and we're just going to say, man, we are glad that you're here. And here's the promise. It will get messy, but we believe that messy is the cost of being a church like Jesus intended us to be. And we believe that in here together, in community, is the best shot you're going to get at experiencing Jesus in a way that will change your life and go on to make an impact that will last generations with his hope. That's the core of who we are. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. Then beyond that, what holds us all together is what happens here on Sundays, our Sunday gathering. And the way that we're going to say this is every Sunday matters. Every Sunday matters. And we're going to talk more about this next week. But this community, when we gather here on Sunday mornings, this is our encouragement and it's our training ground to learn how to follow Jesus, to become covered in his dust. This is our refuge from the storms of life and all the chaos that exists in the world. It's a community that we link arms with and we say, hey, we're going to run after Jesus together. If you're hurting, if you're broken, if life is not going the way you want it to right now, we're going to put our arms around you and say, hey, let's keep going. Being here together on Sunday mornings, I don't know if you know this, it's actually a declaration of war. It's a declaration of war against the spiritual realms, reminding us that Jesus is king. And it's spiritual protection. The church represents spiritual protection from the schemes of Satan in a lost and broken world. And it's a reminder every week that we are not alone. We are all in the same boat. And so that's why every Sunday matters when we come in here. And then over the next year or so, this is what we're going to prioritize. This is what we're going to do. We're going to throw parties, all right? Because we believe that Jesus loved the party. And if our rabbi was going to the party, we're just going to follow in his dust to the party where people far from God get to experience him. We're going to do groups together, and we're going to grow in community. Jesus, he didn't just call a couple people to follow him. He had a small group. You realize that? Like he had people he did life with. And if Jesus needed people to do life with, we do too. And we're going to grow in community together. We're going to prioritize leadership development, or maybe a better way to say that is discipleship or apprenticeship to Jesus. We're going to intentionally slow some things down this fall so that we can develop each other as leaders or followers of Jesus. Why? Because our capacity to reach more and more people in a lost and broken world with this good news of Jesus depends on our ability to develop more and more leaders. And then we're going to serve together. We're going to serve in here on Sunday mornings, and we're going to serve out in our community. Why do we serve? Why do we prioritize this? Because to be a follower or disciple of Jesus means that we start to look more like Jesus. And you know how Jesus described himself? He said, I didn't come into this world to be served, but to serve and lay my life down. And so as we serve, we get to practice in becoming more and more like our Rabbi Jesus. And here's what I want you to know. I'm not like throwing stones here at like anyone in this room or culture or anything like that. But man, I've got this sense of urgency about me. I don't know about you, but I look around at our world and I'm like, this Jesus stuff really matters. And I want to run after it. I don't want to become a church where we like just huddle up on Sunday mornings and leave the world behind. And I don't want to leave the church behind for the sake of the world. No, what I want to do is I want to do both. I want everyone around me to get to see the good news of Jesus. And so I wrote down some declarations just for my life. See if any of this resonates with you. I want to be a church where all the barriers between people and Jesus are actually broken down. I want a church where we're increasingly coming to know and trust and follow Jesus' teachings through his words, to actually take them and do them, to live it out. I want a church where we don't have to be ashamed of our past or our present or our future or hide anything when we come in here. We can bring it all in here. We can lay it down before Jesus, and then we can ask him, Jesus, what do you want to do with this? How do you want to change my life? I want to look at Jesus' word for guidance, to learn to depend on the Bible for a better way to do life. I want a community where we link arms and we run after all that Jesus has for us, not at the expense of the world, but for the sake of the world around us. All right? That's the person sitting next to you right now, and that's the person who's not here yet. I want to spend the rest of my life chasing after Jesus in a way that changes me and impacts every person I come in contact with. Does anyone else want to be a part of a church like that? That's the type of community that we want to be. So here's our application for today, okay? And my challenge for us for this series is to take a picture of these next two slides and keep this in front of us. The first one's this: just come back next week. Just come back next week, and let's go on this journey together of following in the dust of our rabbi. And then before I give you the next one, I just want you to picture that Jesus walked in here today, and he comes up to you just like he did Peter, Andrew, James, and John, and he gives you the same invitation. Will you follow me? Because that's the same invitation that Jesus gave to every person across all of history and all of time. And if you were to say yes to that invitation, how would you follow Jesus? One step at a time, right? It would just be one step at a time. And so what we want to ask in here every single week is, Jesus, what's my next step with you? What's my next step with you? What are you asking me? Hit that next slide, Josh. Yeah, what's my next step with you? What are you asking me to leave behind so that I can follow you? How do I need to carve out time to be with you? How do I need to lay my desires before you and let you inform a better way of life? What do you want me to do next? Do you want me to go all in through baptism? Because Jesus, I've never said yes to following you yet. Do you want me to learn how to obey you in this part of my life that I haven't been for a long time? Jesus, do I just need to spend time with you? What does this need to look like? Or how about this one? If Jesus wants to work through us to spread his good news to the world, Jesus, who do I just need to invite to come along with me? Who do I know in my life that needs the hope that I have? And how can I share that with them? So Hope City, let's go on a journey together. Jesus' invitation to follow him is for anyone. It's for anyone who wants it. And it is going to cost us something. All right? I want to be clear with that. But what we give up to follow Jesus is more. We get more from him than anything that we ever give up. And may we all come to see that Jesus believes in us right where we are today. And he believes in you because he chose you. And as we follow him, may we become the kinds of people that become like Jesus and that learn to do as he did as we spend time with him. Let's pray. So Jesus, thanks for today. Thank you for your love and your goodness, and thank you for this community that you are building called the church. And Jesus, we come in here and we admit, man, we don't have it all together. And your call to follow you, man, it feels like a high call. Maybe it feels overwhelming. Maybe it feels like more than I could ever take and put into practice today. But Jesus, you just asked us to start where we are. So in this moment, would you just give us each the best next step that we need to take with you today? And when we come back in here next week, and when we just keep learning to become people who are with you, who are becoming like you, and who learn to do as you did. Jesus, we love you, and we pray all this in your name. Amen.